Ladies and gentlemen, the KDI School Development Talk series will begin momentarily. Please set your name and affiliation as your Zoom username. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first KDI School Development Talk Series virtual event. My name is Min Jung-yoon from the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, and I will be serving as the virtual MC for today's webinar. Now, before we get started, please note that today's webinar is currently being live streamed as well as recorded for knowledge sharing purposes. Please also note that today's webinar will be uploaded to the KDI School's official YouTube channel later on. For today's event, distinguished speakers from Vietnam and the World Bank will give insightful presentations on Vietnam's climate change policies. Simultaneous English-Korean interpretation is also being provided for today's event. Please set the language interpretation option in the Zoom settings. Also, please keep your mic muted when you are not speaking. If you have any questions and comments during the presentations, please leave them in the chat box and we will address them during the Q&A session after the presentations. Now, I would like to proceed with the event by inviting our distinguished speakers to deliver their opening remarks. First, Dr. Jin-Soo Lee, Associate Dean of the Office of Development Research and International Cooperation and a professor at the KDI School, will deliver his opening remarks. Please take the screen, Professor Lee.
Mr. Nguyen Vu Tung, Ambassador of the Republic of Vietnam in the Republic of Korea, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, and participants on Zoom, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. On behalf of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, I'd like to welcome everyone to the first 2023 KDI School Development Talks webinar series. I would thank you all for your interest and participation in today's event. I believe most of the participants are familiar with KDI School in Korea. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly introduce KDI School and the mission of this webinar series. KDI School was founded as an affiliated educational institution of the Korea Development Institute, the first government-led research institute focusing on socio-economic policy in Korea. Established in 1997, KDI School has educated more than 5,000 alumni from 140 countries with a mission of fostering the next generation of global leaders. Among them, a total of 73 Vietnam nationals have either graduated or are attending KDI School. Along with our dedication to fostering global leaders, our mission is to share Korea development experience and public policy strategies to support partner countries so that they can better identify policy alternatives and solutions to discover a more fruitful development path. KDI School's Development Talk series is one of such efforts to support partner countries. The Development Talk series has been hosting policy webinars across developing countries since 2021, selected among Korea's 27 priority partners. The past webinars featured informative discussions on policy responses to COVID-19 of partner countries: Colombia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and Egypt in 2021, and Rwanda, Philippines, Bangladesh, India, and Tajikistan in 2022. As the world is slowly moving out of the pandemic shocks, we decided to look into another urgent issue this year, namely the environmental policy. As people became aware of the harmful effects of emission and the use of chemicals in industry, environmental policy has gradually evolved since the late 1960s. Whereas the early efforts focused on distinct issues such as pollution of air, water, more recent concerns such as the greenhouse effect and the loss of biodiversity requires a broader international response. The key challenge today would be to find a workable consensus which reflects the realities of both the industrialized and the developing countries to develop detailed systems of regulations. Today, we are here to discuss Vietnam's situation first. Korea and Vietnam first established diplomatic relations in 1992, with last year marking the 30th anniversary. Korea is Vietnam's #1 investor and their #3 trading partner. Having maintained a high level of cooperation in all areas, diplomacy, economy, and trade, the two countries have agreed in December 2022 to elevate the relationship to a comprehensive and strategic partnership. Climate change being one of the most compelling global issues, it will also be an important area to be discussed in this transition. Vietnam and Korea signed the framework agreement for cooperation on climate change and laid a foundation for the bilateral cooperation for climate change response. The two countries are strengthening cooperation to meet 2030 national greenhouse gas reduction goals, which includes expanding green ODA that helps perfecting mechanisms on waste treatment, handling air pollution, completing policies for green economy transition. Korea is the third largest bilateral donor to Vietnam, and the World Bank Group accounts for the large proportion of multilateral aid agencies. We hope that participants from the Korean government, researchers, and private sector employees who gather here today will learn more about the Vietnam's climate change policies and the role of World Bank in the region, thereby taking a glimpse of future direction of aid that should be pursued by Korea as a donor country. This webinar would not have been possible without support from Vietnamese embassy in Korea, as well as KDI School's extensive global alumni network. In this regard, I'd like to convey special thanks to our distinguished speakers, Ambassador Nguyen Vu Tung from the Embassy of Vietnam in Korea, Mr. Chu Long Tuan from Vietnam Ministry of Planning and Investment, Dr. Phan Thi Song Thuong from the Institute of Social Science of the Central Region, Mr. Nguyen Van Bao was a government relations representative for the Super Energy Corporation and the current KDI School PhD student. In addition, I want to give special thanks Dr. Matsushimura Mani for sharing your valuable time with us to talk about World Bank mission taking place in Vietnam. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants who joined our webinar. I hope it will provide a learning opportunity for everyone and look forward to lively discussion and various suggestions regarding the direction of development cooperation with Vietnam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Next, congratulatory remarks will be delivered by Mr. Nguyen Vu Tung, Ambassador of Vietnam in the Republic of Korea.
Hello, everyone. Dear Professor Lee, distinguished participants and colleagues. At the outset, I'd like to thank KDI School for the organization of and the invitation for me to address at the 2023 Development Talks webinar series about Vietnam. It is a pleasure for me to join you all, friends and colleagues and experts from Vietnam, Korea, KDI School, and World Bank at this special webinar on Vietnam. As shown by the theme, this event will be a good occasion for us to take stock of Vietnam's policy in the fight against climate change and the role of the ODA donors in this matter. I really appreciate the significance of this event today for a number of reasons. First of all, it shows the support and partnership of the ODA donors for the government of Vietnam's efforts to combat climate change. As one of the countries heavily affected by the climate change, Vietnam has made climate change one of its priorities in the socio-economic development program for the 2021-2030 period. Therefore, the partnership by Vietnam's friends, partners, and especially the ODA donors in this field is much appreciated. Secondly, this is a vivid demonstration of the recently elevated Vietnam-Korea relations. I just want to echo what Professor Lee just said. Korea maintains its place as Vietnam's second largest ODA provider, while Vietnam is still ranked as one of the priority ODA partners of the ROK for the years of 2023, with the amount of 159 million US dollars. In addition, these ODA projects, as well as bilateral cooperation focusing on areas of priorities of Vietnam, such as climate change, shows the evidence of the strategic and comprehensive nature of Vietnam-Korea bilateral relations. Thirdly, this webinar allows Vietnamese experts to introduce different aspects of Vietnam's policies or strategy against climate change, ranging from development of the energy sector to the identification of FDI priorities, as well as in other fields. The information shared in this event will not only inform ODA projects by the World Bank, ROK, as well as other partners, but also guide the participation of business, non-governmental, and private sectors in the overall strategy to combat climate change in Vietnam. Last but not least, this webinar shows the important role played by the KDI in working together with Vietnamese partners, including the Vietnamese Embassy in Korea, in building research and policy making capacities for Vietnamese officials. So with that in mind, I again sincerely thank KDI School for organizing the event today. May I wish the participants effective and fruitful exchange of views. Thank you very much for your attention. 감사합니다.
Thank you for the kind message, Ambassador. Now, I am pleased to invite the first presenter of today, Mr. Bao Eun-nu Eng. He is currently a KDI School PhD student, and before he joined the KDI School, he was a government relations representative at the Super Energy Corporation in Vietnam. Today, he will be speaking on the current status and prospects for development of the power sector in Vietnam. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Bao Eun-nu Eng.
Hello everyone, my name is Bao and I'm a PhD student at KDI School of Public Policy and Management. And I'm also a student at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, where Dr. Tung was the president. Nice to meet you. So my topic today is the current status and prospect for the development of power sector in Vietnam. So first, I would like to introduce an overview of Vietnam's energy sectors. So Vietnam is a dynamic and emerging economy with a population of almost 100 million people. And before the COVID-19 pandemic, the country has been experiencing an average of 7% GDP growth. and which result in a significant increase in both energy demand and greenhouse gas emissions. So given the forecast for high economic growth until 2030, raising energy demand will lead to severe power shortage. And Vietnam is actively pursuing a more diversified energy mix to meet the increasing demand for electricity and to promote a greener and more stable power system. But the country is still relied on coal-fired powers, which accounts for about 46% of the electricity productions, and hydro powers with accounting for 31% in 2021. And the countries has significant prospect for sustainable energy sources such as biomass, solar, and wind power. So about the policy related to energy. So the policy system for climate change in general and the energy sector in Vietnam is quite complex and involving many sectors from different levels. So at the COP26, the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties in 2021 in the UK, Vietnam made a commitment towards net zero emissions by 2050. And at the COP27, Vietnam submitted the updated national determined contributions to the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change. And the country is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emission by 55.8% below business as usual level by 2030, and by 43.5% below business as usual level, conditional on international support. So now I would like to introduce one of the important documents in the energy sector. This is resolutions 55. So in 2020, the government issues the resolutions of number 55 on strategic energy orientations until 2030 with a vision to 2045. And all relevant documents have been revised based on the spirit of these resolutions. So the objective is to raise the proportion of new and renewable energy in the total supply to 30% within the next 10 to 25 years. And the resolutions also emphasize, but also create an opportunity for domestic and foreign private companies to engage in Vietnam electricity market. And the second one is the Master Power Development Plan 8. So which one remains in draft form with the final approval by the office of the government and Prime Minister still pending. And the Master Power Development Plan 8 was original to be issued in early 2021, but has undergone several rounds of revisions based on extensive public and private stakeholder consultations with numerous draft versions issued by the Ministries of Industries and Trade over the past 2 years. So this plan will actually result in higher proportions of power being produced by natural gas, solar, and wind. So now I would like to introduce some key opportunity as well as current status of some related to energy sectors. The first one is solar powers. Solar power projects in Vietnam are concentrated mainly in the central and southern regions, accounting for over 96%. However, the demand in these regions is not as high that in the north. So there is a huge need to build the transmission line system in the north. And related to solar rooftop, and there is still has room for growth, especially in industrial zones. And when it comes to ground-mounted solar, with actually with a limited number of projects to be approved due to the delayed development plan. About wind power, Vietnam is placing great importance on wind powers as a part of shift towards clean energy, and almost all wind power projects are located in the central and southern regions. But despite their higher cost and added complexity, offshore wind projects offer an opportunity to add capacity while providing more relief to the power grid than other renewables. So hydropower, which one is the largest source of electricity generations, mostly owned by Vietnam Electricity. And according to the master plan, so the Vietnamese government doesn't encourage this type of generations. About gas-fired powers, so most of gas-fired projects in Vietnam has been dealing with a shortage of gas supply and must run under capacity. And it's expected that after 2030, gas-fired power plants also will burn hydrogen, starting at 20% and gradually increasing to 100%. About liquefied natural gas, is actually quite new in Vietnam, and there has been no any liquefied natural gas project, and no like mechanism has been issued until now. About coal-fired powers, so this one around half of Vietnam electricity is produced by coal-fired plant with a total capacity of like 24,674 across 39 power plants. So, but according to the master plan, PDP 8 aim to discontinue the development of new coal-fired power plants after 2030 and shift toward a fuel conventions process. So about biomass and hydrogen, the PDP 8 would prioritize the use of biomass electricity by identifying it as an important method for utilizing agriculture byproducts and promoting afforestation. And it's estimated that by 2050, the demand for hydrogen will reach 23 million tons, and which will be used to substitute gas and produce ammonia instead of coal. So in the light of the Prime Minister commitment, the country commitment towards net zero economy by 2050. So it is very important for government agency to reaffirm their energy development plans during this period. And at part of this process, market liberalizations with the participation of private sector will be very important to the sustainable development of the energy system. There are a lot of opportunities for foreign companies to engage and to participate in power grid market in Vietnam, such as consulting, installations, or investment in new power projects. And some website may be helpful for foreign company interested in exploring business development opportunities in Vietnam's electric power industries. So that's all for my presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the informative presentation, Mr. Bao Eun-Yang. Let's keep moving on the next presentation. I'm pleased to invite the next speaker, Dr. Phan Thi Sung Tuong. She is currently a researcher at the Institute of Social Science of the Central Region in Da Nang, Vietnam, and she will be speaking about Vietnam's green growth strategy and private investments in renewable energy. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Phan.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Yeah.
can hear you.
Let me share my presentation first. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to send my special thanks to KDI School for giving me this opportunity to share my presentation with the title Vietnam Green Growth Strategy and Private Investment in Renewable Energy. So my presentation will include in two parts. First, I would like to share some overviews of Vietnam Green Growth Strategy. And the second is about the private investment in renewable energy. So for this part, I'm going to share some current supporting policy for private investment in renewable energy. And then I will give some current status of private investment in renewable energy. And finally, I will inform some opportunity for private investment in renewable energy in Vietnam. So as you know, the first national green growth strategy for 10 years in Vietnam was promulgated in July 2012. And it is so that the Vietnamese government pays more attention on responding to climate change. Later on, the government issued many level documents to implement the strategy, notably in 2014, we promulgated action plan on green growth in Vietnam, and then Natural Resources and Environment Action Program for the implementation of the National Green Growth Strategy. And in 2014, in 2021, the government issued the National Green Growth Strategy for next 10 years for the periods of 2021, 2030, and the vision to 2055. And for this National Green Growth Strategy, the government set out two big overall targets. The first is accomplish green growth in order to achieve economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, and social equity. And the second target is travel towards a green and carbon neutral economy, contribute to the realization of the goals to reduce global warming. Based on that, we specify four specific targets. First is reduce the greenhouse gas emission. We try to reduce at least by 15% compared to 2014 until 2013 and reduce 30% compared to 2014 until with the targets until 2050. And the second specific target is about greenify economic sector, in which our government set up the targets to increase the proportion of renewable energy in total primary energy supply, reach about 15 to 20% until 2030, and reach 25 to 30% until 2050. And the third specific target is greenify the people lifestyle and promote sustainable consumption. We have several detailed targets. And the fourth is greenify the transformation process based on the principle of equity, inclusivity, and raising the resiliency. For private investment in renewable energy, so for each type of renewable energy, the Vietnamese government applied different supporting policy with the aim of attracting more private investment to achieve the targets about 20% of renewable energy in total primary energy supply until 2030 for wind power, biomass power, waste to energy power, and solar power, as you can see in this slide. And we also give some tax incentive. For example, for renewable energy project, will be exempt from import tax on imported fixed assets and construction material. Thus, the country cannot be produced. And also incentive on investment credit and loan. The Vietnam's government also applies fees to support investment in renewable energy, especially for solar and wind power. And as you know, the total FDI in renewable energy has increased increasingly in Vietnam recently. The total FDI in 2020 was in electricity production and distribution was over $5.4 billion US, 4 times higher than previous year. And the international support program and project for renewable energy investment with a total funding value about $440 million US. And renewable energy investment rose from 10th position in 2018 to 3rd position in 2019 in the ranking of the most attractive investment in this investment field in the country. And in 2018, Vietnam renewable energy investment increasing about $5.2 billion US, 9 times more than previous year. And for example, for solar power, the host country recently has 148 projects in 2020. And in this year, Vietnam was the top of 10 countries with the highest installed solar capacity of global. And for wind power, we have 146 wind power projects have signed the power purchase agreement with capacity about 8,000 megawatts. So the national power system has a total of 48 wind power plants with a total capacity of more than nearly 4,000 megawatts. So as you know, Vietnam has many natural geographic potential that are ideal for the developed renewable energy industry, especially for solar and wind power. For instance, Vietnam is one of the country has the highest number of sunshine hours in ASEAN. Average is about 1,500 to 1,700 hours per year, especially in the southern region where the most of domestic products area are concentrated. And rooftop solar energy will account for about 50% of Vietnam's total solar capacity by 2030. And over 39 of area of Vietnam having wind speed greater than 6, equivalent to capacity 512 gigawatt, and about 8.6 of land and water suitable for wind power farm. This is a great opportunity to attract private investment in renewable energy. And furthermore, Vietnam ranked 31 in the list of countries with high attraction for investment and development opportunity in renewable energy sector. And according to the International Energy Agency, Vietnam is the second largest electricity user in Southeast Asian country. So this opened up great opportunity for foreign corporation to invest in renewable energy, especially in renewable energy in Vietnam. And recently, Vietnam has established a system of law and policy to promote private enterprise to participate in implementation of sustainable development goals and invest in green growth. The National Assembly and the government also issue many financial solutions, creating an equal environment for private investment, private enterprises to develop. As Mr. Ba also shared some document about Vietnam energy development. So I also share some targets of different legal document of the government on renewable energy development. For example, in 2015, we issued Vietnam Renewable Energy Development Strategy with the targets that primary objective of this strategy to develop and utilize renewable energy resources in such a way to contribute to fulfill the objective of sustainable development and development of green economy. And also resolution 55 in 2020 with the National Energy Development Strategy also set the prioritization of solar and wind energy potential, promotion of investment in renewable and green energy. And of course, Vietnam Power Development Plan also set a high renewable energy targets. And recently, we draft Energy Master Plan for the next 10 years, 2021 and 2030, with a vision to 2055 on the national strategy for low carbon development, including renewable energy development strategy, strategy for climate change, and green growth strategy. So in conclusion, attracting private investment in renewable energy sector is identified as one of the decisive solutions to Vietnam to ensure the successful implementation of green growth strategy with targets toward about 20% of renewable energy in total primary energy supply, as well as respond to climate change and realization of net zero emission commitment of the Vietnamese government. So this is on my presentation I would like to share to you. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any comment or question, so welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the informative presentation, Dr. Phan. Next, we'll be hearing our last presentation from Vietnam. I'm pleased to invite our third speaker, Mr. Chu Long Thuong. He served as Deputy Head at the Ministry of Planning and Investment of Vietnam, and he will offer his guidance on foreign direct investment in the country. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Chu Long Thuong.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my presentation. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. So today I'm going to introduce you guidance on foreign direct investment in Vietnam. My presentation is structured as follows. It's including the first part is snapshot, and the second part is foreign investment cooperation strategy, and next is strategy on green development, and followed by the investment protection, incentives and support, and the last is taxation. First, let's take a snapshot on Vietnam. Vietnam is a country where it's located in the Southeast Asia, and it shares a land border with China, Laos, and Cambodia, with the land area is more than 331,000 square kilometers. The population is more than 99 million people, and the unemployment rate is 2.32%, with the labor force more than 50 million. In 2022, the country's GDP growth rate is 8.02%, and the average annual income is 4,110 USD, while the inflation rate is roughly 3.21%. Vietnam exports most of its goods and services to Japan, South Korea, Asian, EU, China, and US. And the top exports commodities, including electronic goods, gas money, textile, machinery, instrument, footwear, and wood products. In 2021, the Vietnamese government has already approved the country foreign investment cooperation strategy. The main objective is the total registered capital is expected to reach 150 to 200 billion USD in 2021 to 2025, and to 200 and 300 billion USD in the second leg. And the total implemented capital is expected to reach 100 and 150 billion USD in the 2021 to 2025, and 150 to 200 billion USD in the 2026 to 2030 period. It means that approximately 30 to 40 billion USD per year. The goods localization rate is expected to rise from the existing rate of 20 to 25% to the rate of 30% and 40% in 2025 and 2030 respectively. And the percentage of skilled employees in the workforce is expected to rise from 56% in the 2017 to 70% in the 2025 and 80% in the 2030. The total number of multinational corporations listed as the world's largest 500 corporation by Fortune's magazine from USA, having a presence and operating in Vietnam, should increase by 50%. And by 2030, Vietnam should be listed among the top 3 Asian leading countries and top 60 worldwide leading country in the business environment category by World Bank. In the same years, Vietnamese government also approved its strategy on green development with some specific objectives regarding greening economic sector, And you can see here, and such as digital economy shall account for 30%, stable forest coverage 42%, and the total area of dry crops applying advanced water saving methods roughly 30%, and all the province and cities establishing and implementing provincial air quality management plan by 2030, and most of the population using clean water meeting standards prescribed by the Ministry of Health. And still, regarding greening lifestyle and promoting sustainable consumption, there's some objectives such as ratio of green public procurement to total public procurement is more than 35%, and at least 10 urbans approving and implementing the master plan on green roads urban development towards sustainable smart urban. And for foreign investors who are interested in making investment in Vietnam, the Vietnamese government provides some protection. And in terms of legal assets, it means that there are no appropriation or confiscation. And in case of confiscation for the national defense, security, or national interest, the foreign investor shall get compensation. And in case of changes of law, the foreign investors are entitled to new incentives if more favorable, or keep the current incentive if less favorable than before. In business activities, as the government guarantees us as no priority to domestic goods, services, or vendor, and no restriction on export ratio, quantity, value, type goods or services. Also, the foreign investor can transfer their assets to overseas, and it including the investment capital and liquidation, the income from business activity, and the lawful money and other assets. And there are 4 kinds of investment incentive, is including the first is the import duties exemption. The second is accelerated depreciation. And the third is the corporate income tax incentives. And the fourth is the exemption and reduction of land levy. While the investment support shall include development of technical and social infrastructure inside and outside of the investment project, and training and development of human resources, and science, technology, and technologies transfer. The last is the market development and information provision. Some projects shall be subjected to special incentive and support, which include National Innovation Center established under a decision of the Prime Minister. And the investment projects in sector subject to special investment incentive, we have investment capital of roughly 1.2 billion USD or above, and disperse at least 427 million USD. Or the new investment projects establishing innovation centers and research and development centers, we have total investment capital of 128 million USD or above, and will disburse at least 42.6 million USD. And there are 5 forms of foreign direct investment in Vietnam. And the first form is the execution of an investment project. Is also the most popular form of foreign direct investment in Vietnam. And the second is business cooperation contracts. And the third is capital contribution or purchase of shares and stakes. And the fourth is the establishment of a business city and other forms as prescribed by the government. And let's take a look, quick view on how to set up an investment project in Vietnam. There are 2 kinds of projects. 4 projects not subjected to in principle approval the procedure is very simple. It means that if projects inside the economic zones, industrial zones, exports, processing zones, or high-tech zones, the investor shall submit document to the zone management board, and after 15 days, the investment registration certificates IRC shall be issued. And for project outside the high-tech zone and economic zones, the investor shall submit a document to a provincial department of planning and investment, and also the IRC shall be issued after 15 days. And for projects subjected to in principle approval, it's a little bit more complicated. There are three levels. At the lowest level, in provincial authority approval, the DPI or Joint Management Board shall submit document to a provincial people's committee to get approval. And for at the level of Prime Minister approval, the MPI, Ministry of Planning and Investment, shall submit documents to the Prime Minister to get approved. And then the provincial DPI or Joint Management shall issue the IRC. And at the highest level, the MPI shall submit documents to State Appraisal Council, and then submit to government, and then to National Assembly for approval before the IRC shall be issued. Let's move to the next part about the taxation in Vietnam. In Vietnam, there are major taxes, including corporate income tax, CIT, value-added tax, VAT, and foreign contractor withholding tax, personal income tax, and other taxes like special sales tax, natural resources tax, environment protection tax, and business license fee, and a number of other taxes. Let's take a quick view on corporate income tax. About the taxes, the current standard CIT rate is 20%, and the CIT rates for enterprises in exploration and mining of petroleum, gas, and other rare and precious natural resources range from about 30% to 50%, depending on the location and type projects. About tax payment from the fiscal year 2022, the provisional CIT payment for 4 quarters must be at least 80% of the total CIT finalization amount. Otherwise, late tax payment interest shall be applied. And the level of CIT incentives that organizations are entitled to varies based on manufacturer, including location, sector, and business scale. Because if the organization are entitled to a number of different incentives regimes, they may choose to apply the more favorable one. Regarding value-added tax, there are 2 methods for VAT declaration, including the credit methods and the direct methods. The condition for adoption of a declaration methods are based on annual revenues, business sector, accounting system, business intention, and other elements. And the 0% rate applies to exported goods and services, aviation, maritime, and international transportation services. 5% rates apply generally to areas clean water, pesticide, services for dating, embarking, dressing of carriers, agricultural machinery and equipment, sugar and byproducts, medical equipment, stitching aid, and so on. And the 10% standard rate applies to goods and services and activities other than those mentioned above. The taxpayer can claim VAT refund from the tax authorities only in limited case, including new project investment, export activity, and some other cases, provided that eligible conditions are met. And so far, Vietnamese government have signed 80 free trade agreements. And some prominent FTA like Asian Trade in Good Agreement, including 10 Asian member countries, Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And the FTA like CPTPP, the Asian Japan FTA, Asian Korea, Asian China FTA, Vietnam European Union FTA, EVFTA, and Vietnam UK FTA. And that's some of prominent FTA. About the workforce, the Vietnamese, the population quality of Vietnam was improved. Fertility rate decreased while the replacement fertility rate has been maintained since 2005. And 50.6 million people in working age. And the country also see a 4.6% increase in annual productivity. And 26.1% of the workforce trains with diplomas and certificates. Of the workforce, 37.9% working in service sector, while 28.9% working in agriculture, forestry, and fishery sector, and the rest working in the industry and construction sector. The workforce in IT field mostly located in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, and 8.55% of the IT workforce being female, and 30% of the IT workforce with more than 5-year working experience. Thank you.
Thank you for delivering such a wonderful presentation, Mr. Chu Long Tuong. Now, I want to welcome our speaker from the World Bank's South Asia region, Mr. Muthukumara Mani, who works as a bank's lead environmental climate change economist. His presentation will discuss reconciling economic success with climate risks in Vietnam. Please welcome Mr. Muthukumara Mani.
Thank you so much again for inviting me for this seminar. And it was very interesting to hear from some of the previous speakers about climate change issues in Vietnam. I would like to present findings of a recent report that we did, which was called Vietnam Country Climate and Development Report, Vietnam CCDR. It's available online for people who would want to see it. The country climate and development reports are kind of new reports that the World Bank has started working on. And basically the objective is to overlay climate on development and to understand how climate change will impact a country's development goals and strategies. The starting point for any country climate and development report is country's economic vision. We all know that Vietnam has been an economic success story, one of the fastest growing economies in the world for almost 2 decades, significant structural transformation from a predominantly agrarian economy to a manufacturing powerhouse. Millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, millions of jobs created, and on social indicators, they have been successful in the implementation of Millennium Development Goals and also on track to meet most of the SDG goals. So clearly, Vietnam's socio-economic story has been is one of great success. But now Vietnam aims to reach the next level, which is to become a high-income economy by 2045. The challenge, of course, to going from a middle-income to high-income economy is quite big, because we know that not many countries have achieved this transition. In the last 50 years, only 7 middle-income countries out of 100 or so middle-income countries made the transition to high-income status. In the last 25 years, only 1 country has made this transition. So transitioning from a middle-income country to a high-income country is not easy. And that's what we coined the term in the World Bank. It's called middle-income trap. So the challenge for Vietnam to become a high-income economy by 2045 is to continue to sustain its current levels of economic growth. But then to sustain this current level of economic growth, Vietnam may need to do a number of things, because the current economic model is based on one of low-wage manufacturing. And as we know from many countries, that this model can only take an economy up to a certain stage. At some point, for example, just like Korea did, just like Malaysia is doing, countries need to switch from low-wage manufacturing to high value-added products, high-tech products. And that is something that Vietnam needs to do very quickly in order to transition to a high-income status. Similarly, Vietnam needs to improve digitalization of its economy. Again, that's a sign of going from middle income to high income. Also, Vietnam's previous growth has come at a huge cost to environment and natural resources in terms of destruction of forests, wetlands, increasing levels of air pollution and water pollution, and so on and so forth. So clearly, going forward, the growth should be more sustainable, should not come at the cost of degradation of environment and natural resources. Vietnam needs to improve the quality of its infrastructure by improving quality of public spending. The financial sector needs to modernize. And finally, of course, they have to do a better job of investing in human capital, in the sense that although they've been very successful in literacy rates, now the focus should be on skills. So clearly, there are a number of things that the country needs to do to transition from a middle-income economy to a high-income economy. But the challenge, of course, is on top of the number of things that the country needs to do, you have also, the country is also facing the climate change threats. Vietnam also happens to be one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. And climate change, as we all know, manifests in different forms. For example, climate change could manifest in terms of increasing temperature and changing rainfall patterns. Climate change could manifest in terms of increased frequency and intensity of extreme events, and climate change can manifest in terms of sea level rise. And different regions of Vietnam will be adversely affected. For example, in the north, or the northern region of Vietnam will experience high temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, which will adversely affect agriculture and health. The central parts of the country will experience increased frequency and intensity of extreme events, and of course the southern part of the country will witness sea level rise, and there are projections that show that the Mekong Delta, half of the Mekong Delta could be submerged as early as 2050 if nothing is done. So clearly, in addition to the other development challenges, climate change poses an additional development challenge to Vietnam, and they have to do something to it. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, clearly Vietnam is not a major contributor to global climate change. The greenhouse gas emissions amount to only 0.8% of global emissions, which is far less than most other countries, major countries like US, China, India, EU, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, Vietnam also happens to be one of the fastest growing GHG emitting countries in the world, primarily because of the massive industrialization and electrification that happened in the last 2 decades. Vietnam's energy consumption almost quadrupled, and that is also reflected in its greenhouse gas emissions. So the question is, although Vietnam is not a major contributor, why should it decarbonize in order to, let's say, meet the Paris Climate Agreement? We would like to argue that there are twofold reasons why Vietnam should decarbonize. One is the increasing levels of greenhouse gas emissions also have been associated with increasing levels of air pollution in the northern part of the country, especially Hanoi and the neighboring regions. And that is having a huge impact on health of the population and productivity of the population. So clearly, decarbonizing the economy will also help solve the air pollution problem that the country is facing. Secondly, globally, a number of countries have taken on net zero commitments. Number of companies, private companies, have taken on net zero commitments. So clearly, the global consumption and production patterns are also changing towards cleaner and greener. And so the demand for cleaner and greener products and production processes is going to increase in the future. For example, in Europe, they are going to start imposing a border carbon tax on goods coming from countries that don't meet certain carbon intensity standards. Similarly, that could be followed in the US, in China, and other countries. So if Vietnam needs to stay globally competitive, it makes sense for Vietnam to decarbonize. But unfortunately, if we don't do anything at this point to deal with climate change, the cost could be quite huge. For example, we show in our study that it could almost reach up to 15% of GDP by 2050. But at the same time, we need to do a number of things to deal with climate change. One, of course, will be to make your infrastructure more resilient. And that would, of course, cost money. For example, any road that you're building, any bridge you're building, any dam you're constructing need to be more climate resilient going forward. Any building that you're constructing need to be more climate resilient, and all that will add to the cost. Similarly, sectors such as agriculture need to become more climate resilient. So we estimate the total costs or incremental financing needs of building a resilient economy, and it comes to about 4.5 to, it will come to about 4.5 to 5.4% of GDP between now and 2040. In addition, Vietnam also we need complementary policy reforms in the fiscal and financial sector in order to stimulate the necessary investment needed both from the public and private sector. So clearly, building climate resilience is costly, and that's something that we need to take into account, especially given that Vietnam has a vision to become a high-income economy by 2050. The government of Vietnam, as we heard from the previous speakers, has taken a number of steps. For example, the Prime Minister announced at COP26 about the net zero commitments, their efforts to halt deforestation by 2030, reduce methane emissions. Vietnam has a green growth strategy in place. So clearly the government is committed to shifting the current growth model towards something that is more greener and environmentally sustainable. That's also reflected in the new environmental law that came into effect in 2022, and of course the PDP, or the Power Development Plan, that's already being discussed. So clearly, on the part of the government, they have taken a number of steps that to move the economy towards more sustainable growth path. But the challenge, of course, is coordination, is one of coordination across various agencies. For example, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment is responsible for the implementation of COP26 commitments. Ministry of Industry and Trade is responsible for the PDP. Ministry of Construction is responsible for certain standards. So the various agencies, various provinces, various levels of government are responsible for implementing various strategies. And so clearly there has to be a better coordination at the highest level. So what we propose in our study is that going forward, Vietnam should follow a twofold path. One of building a resilient pathway. That would mean investing in climate resilience, in infrastructure, in key sectors such as agriculture, and investing in protecting the people. And Vietnam needs to decarbonize. That would mean investing in renewable energy, investing in energy efficiency. That would also benefit in terms of reducing air pollution and also help Vietnam to stay globally competitive. So what we try to show in our study, of course, is that although Vietnam has committed to a net zero by 2050, the current policies will not take them towards that goal. The ambition of the current policy scenarios, especially in the previous Power Development Plan, was not sufficient for them to move towards net zero, but hopefully the current power development plan will help them move in that direction. So what we demonstrate, of course, is that yes, Vietnam can move towards net zero, but it's also going to cost them some resources. That will mean moving away from fossil fuel intensive industries to cleaner industries, moving away from coal to renewable energy, moving towards more energy efficiency and so on and so forth. But at the same time, what's going to happen is that when you move or transition towards cleaner sources of energy, what's going to happen to the people who are employed, for example, in the coal sector? What are we going to do with them? So the biggest challenge will be to help transition these workers. Are currently about 75 to 100,000 of them who are working in these fossil fuel industries. How do we transition them to cleaner sectors? That would mean reskilling them, training them, and so on and so forth. So clearly, that would also cost additional expenditure. So overall, the challenge for Vietnam is that the ambition to achieve the high income economy status is going to be increasingly challenged by climate change, both in terms of climate change impacts and also from their climate change commitments. So we come up with 5 key policy packages or recommendations for Vietnam to move forward. One is, of course, as I mentioned before, the Mekong Delta is highly vulnerable, so they need to have a coordinated approach to dealing with climate challenge in the Mekong Delta. Second, the coastal areas, especially the coastal cities like Ho Chi Minh City and Da Nang, are highly vulnerable to climate change, and they need to be made. The infrastructure in these coastal cities should be made more resilient. Similarly, air pollution is a big problem, mainly because of the increasing focus on fossil fuel-based energy, and clearly air pollution needs to be tackled importantly, especially in the Hanoi region. Fourth, they need to, of course, accelerate renewable energy transition in terms of moving away from coal, investing in solar and wind and so on and so forth. That would also mean incentivizing cleaner sources of energy, especially, for example, there's a huge scope, as one of the speakers mentioned, in offshore wind. But the challenge is, although there's a huge potential, investments so far have not been very forthcoming because of some of the challenges with policy and regulatory framework, which needs to be eased in order to attract more investment in cleaner sources of energy. Finally, people will be most impacted from climate change, both in terms of the climate impacts, for example, farmers of the Mekong Delta, and of course, the coal workers in the northern region, if they have to if the country shifts from coal. So clearly, the most vulnerable people, be it the farmers or the coal workers, they need to be protected through social protection programs. So overall, we estimate that the financing needs and in net present value terms will come to about $368 billion, or about 4.7% of GDP for building resilience, about 2.1% of per GDP for decarbonizing. That would mean about 6.8% of GDP is needed between now and 2040, or without discounting, about $700 billion is needed. The biggest challenge, of course, is where is this money going to come from in order to build resilience and also in order to decarbonize the economy. Much of this has to be financed, of course, by the private sector. And the challenge, of course, is how do we mobilize the private capital to come in for investment in climate change. One good news for Vietnam is Vietnam's private sector is highly liquid, in the sense that the savings of the private sector in Vietnam is one of the highest in the world, almost 20% of GDP. But all that money is currently going into the banking system. So somehow this large chunk of money that is going into the banking system could be mobilized for climate action. So we argue that even 1/4 of that money could be mobilized for climate action, it would come to about 3.4% of GDP. So the 1/4 of the 20% of the savings of the private sector. Similarly, the public sector can mobilize additional resources by introducing carbon tax, by making public expenditure more efficient, and it can mobilize about 2.4% of GDP. So the remaining 1% come from other external sources of financing. So we show that although the investment needs are huge, but financing is possible by mobilizing private capital, by incentivizing private capital, by mobilizing public resources, and also through external source of financing. But the constraint, of course, is mobilizing of private capital, because currently only a very small percentage of the finance from the banking sector goes for green financing or green activities, be it renewable energy or energy efficiency or climate resilient agriculture and so on and so forth. So how do we increase this share of the green finance to be mobilized for the huge amounts of money that we need for climate change? Because currently there is lack of internal procedures and expertise on green finance all across the financial sector. And also there is a tenor mismatch in the sense that most of the credit institutions, the sources of fund is mainly mobilized from short-term deposits, whereas the green finance requires much longer tenure. So that there is a mismatch between the short-term deposit and long-term nature of some of the climate change projects. So it's most important, therefore, to introduce regulatory reforms and incentives to mobilize private capital, both so that the creditors as well as the borrowers feel comfortable in terms of investing in climate-friendly technologies, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate-smart agriculture, climate-resilient infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So green finance is clearly one area where we need to focus much more going forward from a climate change perspective, and that is where most of these resources can be mobilized in order for the country to move forward. So as I mentioned before, I'll stop here, but basically the argument is that Vietnam's vision for becoming a high-income economy largely depends on how it deals with climate change, and we argue that it is possible to achieve a high-income status and deal with climate change, but that would require efforts on the part of the government and also on the part of the private sector. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us today, Mr. Muthukumaramani. I would like to thank our 4 speakers once again for being with us today and sharing their presentations. I think everyone who joined today learned something new about the current climate change issues in Vietnam. Now, I would like to introduce Professor Youngjae Kim, who will be leading our discussion. Professor Youngjae Kim joined the KDI School in 2022. Before joining our school, he worked as a scientist at the European Institute on Economics and the Environment. Please welcome Mr. Youngjae Kim to the screen.
Okay, thank you. And hi, guys. I know it's really interesting talks. So like, I don't know where to start actually. If you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat box, and please feel free to raise your hands. Or I do have many questions personally. Yeah. Okay. There is one question. So Isaac Joel, yeah. So could you turn on your camera and speak up? That would be great, please. So he is curious to know whether they will create dedicated department to implement this plan which emphasize the renewable energy sources, of course. And he is interested to learn whether Vietnam is taking steps to introduce specific laws and establish national R&D plans to invest in renewable energy sources. So, okay, a bit long. So one aspect that is particularly intriguing about this master plan is absence of nuclear power generation. So he's curious to know about the nuclear power plants, future nuclear power plants, and whether there is ongoing debate about the renewability of nuclear power. It is deniable fact that there is a growing conversation about its practical use in achieving carbon neutrality. He is curious to know if Vietnam has abandoning the nuclear power plant or not. Anyone can answer this question first. Any speakers? Yeah, Bao.
Oh yes. So regarding the second question is about nuclear power. So as I mentioned about my presentations, the resolutions of 55 has not been indicated. State that there's no plans to resume building nuclear power plants after the process was stopped in 2016. So until now, the government decided to postpone nuclear power. And regarding research, national research and development centers, so I don't have data, but I know that there's several like foreign company, they open research and development center in Vietnam, such as Samsung or some big company. So I hope it's answered your questions.
Yeah, okay. Good. Thank you. Any other response from the speakers? Any ideas or is it? I think it's good to know further about. Oh, yeah. Dr. Fan? Yeah.
Yes, regarding the first question related to renewable energy, actually in Vietnam, recently we don't have any laws, a specific law for renewable energy, and we are planning to issue. I mean, the government plan to issue like special law for renewable energy. Actually, renewable energy is quite new investment in Vietnam. So we are on the process, and we recently don't have what's his question? It's a department. A specific department who are in charge of renewable energy. As you know, in Vietnam, energy is one of the monopoly industry in Vietnam. So it's run by Vietnam EVN, Vietnam Electricity Company. So it's a big group economics in Vietnam. So those issues was go through EVN. So we are trying to try to make more clarify on attracting investment in renewable energy in the near future. Even we have the strategy plan recently, but we still on the process. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's the point that I was curious to know as well, because Dr. Fan mentioned about the current status of the private investment and not the public investment, right? So like in the academic literature, there is a paper that talks about a public R&D investment from the government in renewable energy industries, crowding in or crowding out private investment, and this is the case for the vice versa. I mean, private investment is the more significant than the public investment, but I think it's kind of unique aspect of the emerging countries. Yeah. Okay. The second question was Yongsik Go, and is there any type of a procedures go through, like the onshore power plants is similar with the offshore project? Like I think it talks about the wind power plant, right? So do you have any similar type of a procedures to get a FDI, a foreign direct investment on in terms of the offshore wind power plants? So Long, I think you are the perfect person to address these questions. Your mic is muted, actually. Could you please turn it on?
First, I would like to make an addition to the previous question, because first, for the power development plan is something like in Vietnam, the Ministry of Industry and Trade in charge of this, and they already have a department to take care of the power plant. And for the offshore projects, you mean that FDI Vietnam, we don't have any specific law or regulation for offshore projects, but it's still we have some policy to stimulate the projects in the power plants, because the power plants project shall receive some incentive regarding the taxation, regarding the lands levy or something like that.
So as a foreign foreigners foreign investors or companies, which one is much easier, like, onshore power plants or offshore power plants? Which one is more easier to getting involved with this?
Easier, I think. Usually the onshore project is easier to invest, because for offshore projects it's regarding to some like the sea, the water, ocean, and so many other elements, and that's take time. It takes time for the authority to consider the factor that can affect the projects before they can grant the certificate of investment.
Okay. On top of that, I was also curious to know whether Bao talked about a potential solar capacities between solar rooftop plants and ground-mounted solar plants, right? And ground-mounted solar plants has significant soft cost that incurred, so that the process is much delayed compared to the solar rooftop plants. So as a foreign investors or companies, which one is much more relatively easier to invest or jump in, like the solar rooftop or ground-mounted solar power plants? Bao?
Yes, thanks for your questions. So actually about offshore and onshore wind farm. So in Vietnam now, so actually there's no true offshore wind farms in Vietnam, and in Vietnam we focus more on onshore, and even the government. In my presentation, I mentioned that offshore wind projects will offer an opportunity to add capacity and also provide more relief to the power grid than other renewable energy. But the policy now, the development of offshore wind project is in its early stage. So
Okay.
so it takes time. So but now it's more investment focus more onshore instead of offshore. But in the futures, there are a lot of opportunities for offshore wind projects, because it could be more attractive and feasible in maybe 20 years, the next 20 years, when let's say coal fire plants must be closed, and further reductions of investment costs can be achieved. So there are a lot of opportunity for offshore wind projects in the future.
Okay. And Bao, continuously, can you make a brief comment about the rooftop solar versus mounted solar power plants?
Okay. About solar rooftops. So there are a lot, I mentioned rooftop, there are a lot of opportunity for rooftop solar, especially in industrial zone. And for this ground mounted solar, am I correct? So
Yeah, ground mounted solar.
right. So there's not many projects approved because according to the master plan, the master development plan delayed to develop ground mounted solar. So there's a limited number of projects to be approved until 2030.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I'm also curious to know whether most of the first three talks are mainly talked about climate change mitigation, but Bucha Kakemura addressed the importance and significance of the climate adaptation effort as well, right? So could you please elaborate further about the funding allocation issues, or what's the optimal, or I mean, the optimal funding distributions between climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation? I mean, mostly a effort is heavily tilted toward the climate change mitigation, right? So I'm just curious to know your perspective about this.
Yeah, I would think that for a country like Vietnam, which is so highly vulnerable to climate change, we feel that climate change adaptation should be a priority, because Vietnam is only a small contributor to global emissions. And in terms of investment in climate adaptation, most of the investment have to come from the public sources, because you are talking about making your public infrastructure more resilient, making your roads resilient, your dams resilient, your levees resilient. So much of these resources, or much of these adaptation projects are of public nature, public goods nature. So most of the resources have to come from public sources. At the same time, of course, in some cases, for example, agricultural farmers, they are private individuals, but they need incentives to adapt to climate change. So that the incentives has to come from the government. On climate mitigation, as I said, the reason why Vietnam needs to focus on mitigation is because air pollution is becoming a big issue in the country. And secondly, of course, in the future, it could adversely affect Vietnam's competitiveness globally, because all around the world, countries are adopting net zero commitments, and companies are adopting net zero commitments. So the demand will change. I just have to add one thing on the offshore wind investments or in general renewable energy investments. So there are a lot of foreign investors waiting to invest in offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, but they all are looking for transparent regulatory framework, incentive structure, international good practice. One of the most important aspects of an investment is what's called as a power purchase agreement. And a power purchase agreement that a solar investor is looking for, or a wind investor is looking for, has to conform to international best practice. But right now in Vietnam, a power purchase agreement is between the buyer, which is mostly EVN, and the seller, and it is very much done on a case-by-case basis. So it is not a transparent document. It is negotiated on a case-by-case basis. But if you are expecting multitude of international investors to come and invest in offshore wind or onshore wind or solar, definitely the systems or the regulatory framework and especially the power purchase agreements need to be more conform to international best standards. In addition, I think if Vietnam needs to scale up its renewable sources of energy, the grid has to be modernized and improved, because the current grid system conforms more to the older generation of especially supporting coal-fired power plants. But if you have intermittent source of energy like wind and solar coming into play, then clearly the grid has to be modernized. And especially if you are going to explore more offshore wind, of course, the grid capacity needs to be increased considerably to access the offshore wind sources. So I think those are the 2 points. Clearly, the private sector needs to play an important role in mitigation. That would mean more incentives from the government, more transparent regulatory framework. Public sector definitely needs to play a more active role in adaptation.
Yeah, I think it's time to wrap it up. And I just want to mention one point that summarizing pointing out the holistic perspective on this whole kind of diverse range of interesting talks. I think the investing in making the Vietnamese government improving the institutional quality is, I think, plays an important role in driving in the investment from foreign countries, particularly like Korea and many other developed world, I think. Yeah. But that's the important part which is missing throughout the talk, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Young-Jae Kim. If the presenters have anything else to add, I would like to give them an opportunity to do so now.
Okay. I got a question for Mr. Money. Okay. Mr. Money, you know that Vietnam has transformed itself from to one of the poorest country to a middle income country. So how does it affect World Bank policies on Vietnam in terms of financing projects?
That's a good question. I think World Bank has been a partner to Vietnam as Vietnam transitioned from a poor economy to a vibrant middle income economy and from an agricultural based economy to a manufacturing hub. So clearly we are happy to be a partner in this success, and we will continue to support Vietnam going forward. But the thing is that in terms of World Bank financing, the concessional financing that we give to countries is available only for low-income countries. But Vietnam, because it's now transitioned to a middle-income country, is no longer eligible for concessional financing. So you can only borrow from the World Bank on market terms, which is also good. Which is better than most other lending institutions. So that is the only difference in terms of. So you are losing out because from your own success, because you have been so successful, you don't need the World Bank money anymore. So that's the answer.
Thank you.
Okay, and if no one has any further comments, I would like to wrap up the session. Thank you again for participating in our webinar and sharing your knowledge with us today. Before leaving, please kindly note that a participation survey will be emailed to you soon, and we will greatly appreciate it if you could take a few moments to complete it so that we can improve our webinars in the future. I hope to see you again for our webinar series next month. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much.